Today we'll try to cover some handsome amount of units which are in relation to civil services and personal reforms, and the other one is for public policy. I hope that we all know how important all of these three units are for us. That is why you'll also see around 88 questions in each unit coming in the past 3 years only, right? So that is how important these three would become. So we'll get started. If you have any doubts, you can ask me before. Otherwise, we'll start directly to the questions. ठीक है, तो we'll start with the unit 8 of paper 2, which is civil services. This is also directly linked to the unit 9 of paper 1, which is personnel administration. Although both of them are very, very interlinked, however, we'll be covering them separately. We'll start by covering the question that came this year. The district training component of induction training of IAS officers requires to be revisited, examined. It's primarily a question on training. However, they've specified, because it's a 10 marker, so you can make it more specific. So they've specified it to include the district training component at the induction level of the IAS officers training. Excuse me. Yes. Okay. So we'll be covering the answer in the standard introduction body conclusion format. In the introduction, we'll try to cover the basics of training and then dive deep into what district training is. In the body, we'll talk about, because they're talking about induction training and subcomponent of induction, which is district training. So we'll talk about induction and district training. Thirdly, we'll talk about why there's a need to revisit it and what can be done to revisit it, in the sense that what would be the changes that we will require, right? And then we'll conclude. Introduction: the district training component of the induction training program for IAS officers is a critical phase that provides a hands-on experience in district administration. However, there is a need to revisit and potentially reformulate this training to address the contemporary challenges. We'll then talk about the induction and the district training. So since its inception in 1969, when the sandwich pattern was introduced, the IAS officer trainees undergo a 1-year district training in their allotted state cadres. This period combines learning by seeing and learning by doing. You have to try to include such keywords in your answers, and you can directly pick them for any training question as well. So learning by seeing and learning by doing, as the officer trainees also handle independent charges during this period. What would be the basic objectives? Because you have to talk about, the training as such. So we'll try to keep it specific to district training, because the question demands so, right? So organizational structure, roles and responsibilities, basic understanding of acts and rules, system of program implementation, monitoring and report, shortcomings or problems. I have to keep it short and crisp, because this again is not the main demand of the question. The main demand is this need for revisiting the district training. In the need, we'll talk about the reasons or why, and then how, right? This is the main demand, and this is only a 10 marker. So we'll directly start upon hitting it. The first point that you can talk about why you need it is because of the changing socioeconomic landscape. So the socioeconomic dynamics of districts have evolved over time with new challenges such as urbanization, environmental concerns, shifting demographic patterns. You can also talk about, okay, so we're talking about in the second point, just the technological advancements. The integration of technology in governance and administration demands updated training on e-governance, data management, digital services. It's a 10 marker, so you have to keep the points less. If you want to increase more points, you can always talk about how people are becoming more aware. The political culture is changing towards cognition, right? With the coming in of liberalization, privatization, and globalization era, there are multi-stakeholders. There's a multi-stakeholder paradigm, right? That is why you need new public governance. So for all of this, you need to have a revisit to the district training as of today. Reforms and enhancements, what all can be done? So there needs to be a multidisciplinary approach, wherein we'll include various sectors like health, education, environment, urban planning, to prepare officers for holistic district administration. Inclusive governance. In this inclusive governance, as we also study some keywords for development administration, you can talk about inclusive, equitable, prosperous, sustainable as well, and gender, right? So emphasizes inclusive governance by involving civil society organizations, community groups, marginalized communities in the training process. There should be enhanced focus on the practical training rather than the theoretical training. We can also start by giving up an example. So for example, the advanced mid-career training program for IAS officers as in today could serve as a model, as it provides a platform for officers to engage with a range of stakeholders and address contemporary issues. Conclusion: revisiting the district training component is imperative to equip the IAS officers with the necessary skills and knowledge to effectively address the modern challenges. A multidisciplinary and inclusive approach will prepare officers for realistic district administration. You can also combine it with the portals such as Pragati, and you can also talk about Mission Karm Yogi, etc., so that you have at least a couple of your keywords in your conclusion. Although they may not directly be linked, but you can also write them in a manner that it seems to be linked to the question. Yes. Okay. Any doubts? Otherwise, we move on to the next one. All right, seeing none. Second question is with reference to a transparent transfer policy. This was again seen this year. So the direct question, I'll read the question first. Civil service reforms along with the transparent transfer policy will go a long way in insulating the civil servants from undesired political pulls and pressures. Discuss. Yes, so this is directly related to the politicization of bureaucracy, etc. In reference to the transfers, right? Although this is a 20 marker, so you'll have to beat around the bush a lot and not just talk about a transparent transfer policy. This will be the main crux of the question, but you will also have to talk about the politicization, etc., and the unbalanced polity that you often see, and then also talk about the reasons why this happens, right? Okay, so in the introduction, we'll talk about the basics about civil services. In the body, we'll try to talk about the transfer process, which is the personal process, and then we'll have to link it to the role of the political executives in the personal process concerned. Then we'll talk about the need of stability of tenure and issues and challenges pertaining to it. And then how can we bring about the reforms, and then we'll conclude, right? Okay, as far as the introduction is concerned, the civil service is an integral part of administration and the structures of administration to determine the way civil services functions. So why are we talking about the structure? Because a transfer policy would always pertaining to the structure of the organization, in which case this is civil services, right? Civil service reform is a deliberate change effort by the government to improve its capacity to effectively and efficiently execute the policies. This is one line that you can directly use for any civil service reforms, right? As your introduction. Deliberate change and effort by the government to improve its capacity to effectively and efficiently execute the policies. Because at the end of the day, the main aim of civil servants is to execute policies, right? So policy implementation. Okay. As civil servants, also in this question, I have to clearly demarcate the roles. So political executives are supposed to formulate the policies, while permanent executives are supposed to implement those policies as per Weber as well, right? As civil servants, permanent executives are controlled and managed by political executives. There are often instances of undesired political pulls and pressures to work in their favor. Stability of tenure is an important requirement for administrative efficiency. So we are now talking about why do you need stability? So you need stability to ensure higher efficiency. Although political control over the services is also necessary. In civil services, the stability of tenure is much more important, which was even articulated by thinkers like Henry Fayol, right? You can try to link the thinkers in terms of stability of tenure. A civil servant needs to develop his skills and expertise, for which they require stable tenure. Stability is also needed to develop the domain competency. You can also try to mention about second ARC here, where they're talking about the need for a functional classification, right? In terms of their domain expertise. It also has implications for career progression and keeping the politics out of the civil services. In essence, stability of tenure is necessary for integration of individual and organization goals. We have here explained why do you need stability. Now we'll talk about the issues in pertinence to this personnel process. It often leads to politicization of bureaucracy, and political executives want civil servants to work and function as per their whims rather than the laws and regulations. You can also talk about goal displacement here of Weber, where we say that because of all such phenomena, the goal of the bureaucracy therefore becomes to stick to the rules and regulations rather than ensuring the welfare of people. This is how goal displacement happens. You can also talk about the thinker associated, which is Veblen. The second ARC in its report refurbishing public personnel administration has said that nearly 60% of the civil servants have less than 2 years of tenure. You can directly use this fact because it pertains to the stability of tenure and is directing to the question. It identifies that transfers reduce effectiveness and the officer's job satisfaction. Here you can also talk about job enrichment, vertical job loading, etc., and impede their career development and erode the political neutrality. Okay. Yes. So what are the reforms that you need? You will talk about the holistic overall reforms as well, and also give a quick focus on the transparent transfer policy that you need. So the second ARC in its report, the refurbishing personnel administration, has recommended about how to improve relationship between the politicians and the bureaucrats. This is the main crux of the question. Establishing a central civil services authority and such authority for the state level as well, and giving them adequate power to deal with personnel management decisions of the civil servants, which will help in the depoliticization of the process. This is one of the most important points to establish a neutral central civil services authority with adequate powers. Second, you have to fix the tenure as a principle that has been articulated since the time of the classical thinkers and is very much necessary for achieving 3 E's. I've also talked about how you can try to include the 4th E wherever you see development administration coming into play. And what is the 4th E? It's equity. Code of ethics for the civil servants, where you need integrity as a value. So civil servants should be guided solely by public interest in their official decision making and not by any financial or other consideration, either in respect of themselves, their families, or their friends. You can also talk about how you need to let go short-term political gains for long-term economic rationality or sustainable development, right? And this can only come in once they have integrity attached. You need impartiality. The civil servants in carrying out their official work, including functions like procurement, recruitment, delivery of services, etc., should take decisions based on merit and free from any partisan. You can also talk about the value as well as political neutrality of Weber in this case. You need a code of conduct for the ministers as well. So you've talked about how you need a code of ethics for the civil servants. Similarly, because politicians are also involved in this, so you need a code of conduct for ministers. The minister should have code of conduct which should adhere to in dealing with the civil servants. You need to bring about reforms in the personnel process. As such, you need reforms in recruitment, training. You can pick up one line from there. Best solutions. You need domain expertise. You need functional expertise. And this was given by second ARC. It's basically a functional domain expertise that you need. Please do mention second ARC as well, because it's a direct thing that you've picked up from there. However, it is also necessary that the executive should have control. Yes, so here you try to draw the balance, the middle path. You tell us that, so we all know that autonomy and accountability remain two big problems which are very conflicting in nature in any organization. So you try to draw a balance between them. You say that although you need autonomy for the civil servants in terms of their political neutrality, however, control is also necessary. If administration own, managed, and lead system that deals with all the personal management processes established, it might create lack of effective control from the part of executive on the administration. Also, you can also talk about how the state can itself become Leviathan if there's no check and balances, right? And you can also talk about it becoming to new despotism. Weber itself said that if you're not brought under a check, the bureaucracy, then it can become into new despotism, right? That is why you need a quick balance. The second ARC recommendations have transformative potential to change the relation between the politics and administration in India, and the government needs to implement them in the right spirit. Right? Any doubts with this question? Otherwise, we'll move on to the next one. All right. Third, the question is in pertinence to the lateral entry recruitment, which was asked in 2022. So examine the lateral entry recruitment in government in the context of Part 14 of the Indian Constitution, even if you do not know what Part 14 is, because the nature of the question is such, and you know that in the, I think I have a chart. Yes. Yeah. So because the nature of the question is such, you, even if you do not remember what Part 14 is, or you don't even know what Part 14 is, but you need to understand that we have rarely read about the civil services in the Constitution, and wherever we have, it is around Article 315, right? Where we talk about the independence and the extra powers, etc. So you can directly introduce what Part 14 is, which talks about the civil services directly. Okay, so Part 14 of the Indian Constitution under Article 315 to Article 323 contains the provisions regarding the composition of Union Public Service Commission, appointment and removal of its members, and the powers and functions of UPSC. Lateral entry refers to the induction of private sector specialists in the government departments. You tell us what lateral entry is because it's a new concept, but also not as a new concept. So you just let the examiner know what according to you lateral entry is. You say that it refers to the induction of the private sector specialists in the government departments. In 2018, the government decided to undertake lateral recruitment of joint secretaries to fulfill the twin purpose. And what was the purpose of bringing in domain expertise to the civil services and also addressing the problem of shortage of IS officers at the center? So far, a total of 37 office, even if you don't know this, that's okay, but because it's a model answer, so we can include it because we know it. So far, a total of 37 officers appointed to the lateral recruitment are serving the bureaucracy at different levels, with 7 selected in 2019 and 30 in 2021. Although it's a 10 mark, you don't need all this, but still, as a matter of data and fact, if you need it, because lateral recruitment is becoming very popular these days, right? Because you have to examine, so we'll talk about the positives as well as the negatives. So we're talking about the advantages first, and then we'll talk about the challenges relating to that. Advantages of lateral entry: you get specialized knowledge experience in there. So governance, as it's becoming more and more complex and challenging, it requires specialized skills. For example, increasing penetration of data dominance in our lives. Second, this is just an example, right? Filling the gap. According to the Department of Personnel and Training data, there is a shortage of about 1,500 IS officers. Lateral entry can help bridge this deficit. So these are the first 2 points that we have directly picked from the twin purpose objective that we've also already mentioned. We talked about how we need a domain knowledge, and second, how we need to fill the gap or counter to the shortage, cater to the shortage, right? Bringing a change in the work culture. You know that the private work culture differs from the government work culture. So it will help in bringing change in the bureaucratic culture in the government sector. This bureaucratic culture is criticized for red tapeism, rule book bureaucracy, status quoism, reactiveness rather than proactiveness, right? You can write all the negatives here for the bureaucratic culture. Lateral entry helps in bringing the values of economy, efficiency, and effectiveness in the government sector, while so this is something that can bring about by the private sector, and then the government sector has the ethos of equity already, right? So you complete the 4 E's. It will help in bringing a culture of performance within the government sector. Fifth, participatory governance. Presently, governance is becoming a more participatory and multi-actor endeavor. In this context, you can talk about new public service, new public governance paradigm, etc. In this context, the lateral entry provides stakeholders such as the private sector and non-profits an opportunity to participate in the governance process. So these could be the advantages. What would be the challenges of such a lateral entry scheme? First and foremost, outsourcing the expertise. So there's a difference between bringing expertise inside and being part of the decision making process. For bringing expertise, the government doesn't strictly need to hire the private sector personnel. Expertise is widely available and used by almost every ministry. You have expert committees, you have consultations, you have think tank engagements. So all of this can be done even without bringing them to be a part of the system, right? You can have consultations with them, you can have think tank engagements wherein you can have the role of private sectors. You can constitute expert committees wherein private sectors are members, private sector specialists are members of them. So you can bring in expertise even without letting them being in the positions of power. Second, it's a cumbersome decision-making process. As and when more and more people are involved with differing ideologies, the decision-making becomes slow and cumbersome. So the success of lateral entry requires an understanding of the system and an ability to work with the permanent establishment. No training or orientation is provided for this. Thirdly, profit motive versus public service. You know that the basic ethos of private sector is profit maximization, whereas the basic ethos of the government sector is to serve for the public or ensure the welfare of the public. There's a conflicting objectives, right? These are conflicting objectives for all of the sectors. So whenever a private sector member comes in, their objective would be profit motive only. So private sector approach is profit oriented. On the other hand, motive of the government is public service. This is also a fundamental transition that a private sector person has to make while working in the government, and might come in as a challenge or an obstacle, right? Conflict of interest. That's one of the most important points. Hiring of the private sector into the administrative positions raises issues of potential conflict of interest. This issue requires a stringent code of conduct. You also provide solutions simultaneously, because I think it's only a 10 marker, right? So you don't have much space. Yes, it's a 10 marker. Yes, so this issue also requires a stringent code of conduct for entrants from private sector to ensure the conflict of interest is not detrimental. You can here also try to mention the example of how Vijay Mallya was, although the managing partner or director of Kingfisher, yet was included as a member on the panel on constituted by the Ministry of Civil Aviation, right? So this is a conflict of interest. Conclusion: with way forward, lateral entry, like competition in any sphere, is a good thing, but serious thinking is required on entry requirements, job assignments, number of personnel, training to make it a force for positive change. Apart from lateral entry, experts from other government services, such as Indian economic services, Indian statistical services, should also be included in the system. Basically, we're trying to say that the services which are specialized in their domain would also be included, not only the private sector. So as joint secretary or under secretary, you can also bring in about Indian economic service officers, Indian statistical services officers, which have their domain expertise, right? You have Indian geological services as well. So all of that, right? Any doubts? Otherwise, we'll move on to the next one. All right.
Yes.
Yes, please. Okay.
Got it, sir.
Right. This question was highly expected. The objective of Mission Karmyogi is to enhance the capacity building of Indian civil servants and improve the governance. Directly 20 marker was highly in news. Yes. So we'll talk about the Mission Karmyogi in brief. This will not be sort of a model answer, but more of the details about Mission Karmyogi. So I'll try to talk about introduction, body. In the body, we'll talk about the details. We'll try to explain the keywords or the submissions under the Mission Karmyogi. We'll talk about the significance and the challenges, and then we'll conclude because we have to discuss it, right? The National Program for Civil Services Capacity Building is the full for, or is the official name of the Mission Karmyogi. So the National Program for Civil Services Capacity Building, that is Mission Karmyogi, was launched to enhance the governance in the country through the transformational change in the civil services capacity building. The National Program for Civil Services Capacity Building, that is Mission Karmyogi, aims to create a competent civil services rooted in Indian ethos with a shared understanding of India's priorities, working in harmonization for effective and efficient public service delivery. The mission seeks to keep the civil services at the center of all changes, empowering them to deliver in challenging environments. This is nothing but a fancy display of your command over the language. 6 key pillars: policy framework, institutional framework, competency framework, digital learning framework, which is the IGOT portal under the Karmyogi, the electronic human resource management system, and the monitoring and evaluation framework. The program will cover all civil servants, including contractual employees across different ministries, departments, organizations, agencies of the union government. How are we trying to enhance the capacity building? The Capacity Building Commission, which was constituted in 2021 as the custodian of the civil services capacity building ecosystem under the Mission Karmyogi, the Capacity Building Commission will do the following. It will make recommendations on standardization of training and capacity building, pedagogy and methodology, coordinate with the government training institutions to carry out research on pedagogy, competency framework, competency gap assessment, etc., make recommendations on policy interventions in areas of personnel or HR and capacity building to the Department of Personnel and Training, undertake analysis of data emitted from the IGOT Karmyogi portal or platform pertaining to different aspects of capacity building, such as content creation, competency mapping, feedback, etc. I've already told you that this is not a sort of a model answer, but more of us giving you details about the plan. So the keywords that you see are not something that you can ideally replicate in the real exam time scenario. So yes, please don't be intimidated by the information. Just take it as plain information. Yes, improving the governance. The focus of the national program for capacity civil services capacity building is also on enhancing the government-citizen interaction, with officials becoming enablers for citizens and businesses, with the development of behavioral, functional, and domain competencies, leading to ease of living and ease of doing businesses. Thus, by design, Mission Karmyogi adopts a citizen-centric approach for civil services reforms. You can have a look at further components of Mission Karmyogi. Significance. Now, this is something that you can build up on your own. Significance and challenges, right? Significance, it shifts from a rules-based to a roles-based HR management approach, aligning competencies with the job requirements. This is a very important keyword, moving away from rule-based to role-based. Second, you have a focus on domain knowledge and functional and behavioral competencies, promoting continuous self-driven and mandated learning paths. Third, you're establishing a uniform training standard, which is applicable nationwide. Therefore, it helps to foster a common understanding of India's aspirations and developmental goals, aims to build a future-ready civil service in alignment with the vision of New India. emphasizes on-site learning alongside off-site training. So on-site learning alongside off-site training, right? What would be the challenges? That there'll be so these are the standard challenges to any administrative reforms also that you would read, right? What is mission community? Nothing but a part of administrative reform. So the standard challenges of administrative reforms also apply here. So you have resistance to change. Bureaucracy often resists change due to preference for the status quo. We have the shift from the generalist to the specialist approach. Moving from generalist to specialist approach can counter resistance despite the need for domain expertise. Technical governance demands much. So effective governance today requires technical proficiency, necessitating skilled personnel. There needs behavioral changes, difficult to be quantified as well as implemented. So bureaucrats must shift their mindset to embrace change as a necessity and not a threat. Active participation online courses should ensure active engagement, preventing them from becoming sabbatical opportunities. What would be the conclusion? The Mission Karma Yogi scheme has the potential to revolutionize the functioning of civil services in India by fostering a culture of continuous learning, innovation, and adaptability. This addresses the long-standing issues like, so you can talk about the negatives of the bureaucracy, which is bureaucratic inertia and resistance to change, aligning with the government's digitalization efforts. And the keyword being the 3 competencies that you want to bring about: behavioral, etc., etc. So knowledge, functional, and behavioral competencies. All right, we'll move on to the next question. If you have doubts, you can already ask. The next question is: responsibility and accountability are the 2 major goals of good governance. Discuss the statement in the context of Indian administration. So responsibility and accountability as the 2 major goals of good governance. Right. In the introduction, I'll give a brief about the Indian administration. In the body, we'll talk about the background, because you have to talk in the context of Indian administration and good governance, right? So brief about Indian administration and good governance. Responsibility and accountability in Indian administration. You have to just add examples here. Also, it's a 10 marker only, and you have to conclude. Introduction: although India adopted a new polity, but continued with old administration, which was established during the British times. What with the background? The present Indian administrative structure is largely a legacy of the British rule in India. Free India inherited governmental machinery as developed by the British. The British had their own objectives. So you tell us as to what were the present structures is governed by the previous objectives. The previous objectives are sustaining and strengthening their empire, right? So this was their main aim. So this has just changed to strengthening and sustaining their own class. So civil servants want to sustain and strengthen their own self. So that is why we also call them as self-aggrandizing, right? And utility maximizing. They made sure there was no accountability of British administration. However, post-independence, people got fundamental rights, state became welfareist from imperialist, and there's an emphasis on good governance, whose key features are accountability, responsibility, and responsiveness. By 1970s, 80s, there was an increase in the dominance of administration, and the Indian administration was laden with multiple challenges, such as, so you talk about, because it's a 10 marker, you cannot draw a separate heading for telling the challenges of the Indian bureaucracy. You just do it in the form of a paragraph. Indian administration, the challenges such as increase in corruption, lack of accountability, red tapeism, my bap kind of attitude, and etc. Administration started to behave like master and treated citizens as servants. However, good governance emerged in 1990s with an aim to democratize public administration and make public administration more citizen-centric in its approach. Good governance introduces a value-laden or normative approach to the governance, which focuses on making the government proactive and pro-people. Therefore, government started to take various initiatives to make Indian administration more responsible and accountable, like RTI, Citizen Charter, Social Audit, Decentralization, Vice 1974, Grievance Redressal, E-Governance, etc. Also, various committees and commissions set up to bring in change. Committee on Prevention of Corruption, second ARC Commission, Administrative Reforms Commission 1966, and then second ARC in 2005. Still, there are challenges or issues such as custodial debts, corruptions, encounters, lack of accountability, etc. The current government has also taken various initiatives such as minimum government, maximum governance, reform of parish, ICT-based reforms such as Pragati, E-Kranti, My Government, Sparrow, Property Solve, MIS, Samiksha, DBT, ERTI, etc. You can also talk about Yogi again. Therefore, to make administration more responsible and accountable, there should be a multi-dimensional approach and involvement of more citizens in the governance process. I think we have missed about the main demand in terms of responsibility and accountability. So you can try to specifically include these 2 as headings. the two major goals of good governance. Tell us what is responsibility, tell us what is accountability, and give us some examples of how you're trying to ensure responsibility and accountability. If the need be, you can also talk about the problems that are arising in terms of us not giving responsibility and accountability. All right. Yes. Move on to the next question. Well-planned and goal-oriented training programs are the backbone of the civil services system in India. Examine the statement. This is again majorly training. So this is overall holistic training. And you just use two adjectives, is well planned and goal oriented. So you tell us how do you want to plan it well, which is structure it well and have various components. And goal oriented, the goal should be what? So we have to just discuss about that. Training and its significance, training in India, well planned and goal oriented be the keywords. What would be the weaknesses and how do we counter those weaknesses along with the conclusion? So conclusion with way forward. Introduction training is a deliberate act to bring desired changes in personnel in terms of aptitude as well as attitude. Training consists of a planned program designed to improve performance at the individual, group, and or organizational level. Basic introduction of training. Now, basics of training in India. So training in India has its roots during the British time that Lord Wellesley laid the foundation of training in India. And since then it has evolved, and after independence it has undergone changes that most recently government has adopted. National training policy. We had training policy 1996, national training policy 2012, and various training techniques like lecture methods, sensory training, etc. adopted. You basically let the examiner know that you know the basics of training. But because again, it's a 10 marker, so you cannot talk about all of this, but still you let them know that the theoretical part of training is sorted as far as your knowledge base is concerned. Post which you directly start hitting on the demand of the question, which is well planned and goal oriented. The DOPT is the apex department of training, while other ministries are in charge of their own particular services. The major services have their own sectoral ministries or departments and have unique training facilities for IPS, IRS, etc. In 1996, National Training Policy, and later 2012. At the same time, the quality of training has been improved by including training in terms of pedagogy and mentoring methods, and the focus is on bringing holistic competence. So this is what we wanted to talk about, how well-planned as well as goal-oriented will make it holistic. Thus, India has a well-planned and goal-oriented training system. Recently, the training for the civil servants have undergone transformative changes. The Kiran Agarwal Committee, the Mission Karmyogi, the Capacity Building Commission, etc. Convergence changes at the state level as well. PM's interaction. You talk about the weaknesses. Again, in the main body, I think we have not directly. So you can, if you want to talk about how what would need to be well planned. So it should be structural and component wise. You can give out some examples here as well. Right, we have mid-career training at the induction, then we have a mid-career training, then you have various trainings or specializations, etc. Goal-oriented, if you talk about the ultimate goal being welfare orientation. And you can here also talk about the goal displacement, which has happened in the current bureaucracy. So you need the goals to be laid down directly and specifically, right? Which are very clear in their approach. What will be the weaknesses? So training in India is still based upon license and inspector Raj practices, and there is a more emphasis on rules, processes, and procedures. This is again nothing but goal displacement. Training modules are not regularly updated. There's a uniform pattern of training, and all individuals are given the same type of training despite varying complexities, right? A civil services survey highlighted in 2010 that more than 75% of IAS officers have said that they have learned more by doing their job rather than the training. Training for all India services is well structured, but for the services at the state level, there is ad hocism. The link between training and performance management is weak, and hence the training is viewed as paid holiday. These are basically the weaknesses of training that you'll find in any standard content, right? You have to just cut copy them. Cut, copy, paste. Yes, the lecture method and classroom teaching are more emphasized, and the attitudinal aspect is not stressed much. So we know that we need to bring about the change in the attitude, behavior, and competence. State level training institutions suffer from infrastructure and human resource issues. This is a standard issue, finance and infrastructure, and so personnel as well. Funds, functionaries, and functions. Conclusion with the way forward in order to address these weaknesses. Recently, the government adopted a new training policy for IAS and also Mission Karmyogi. Mission Karmyogi comes to overcome many flaws, such as of the offline training, such as it facilitates online learning and addresses the lack of capacity. This is basically capacity building. So you talk about capacity here as well. The IGOT platform under the Mission Karmyogi also have linkages and cooperation with institutions in India, including the global institutions, which will lead to regular updating of curriculum of training. Mission Karmyogi will further lead to strengthening training in India and make it more open in that attitude and behavioral changes. Attitude, behavior, and domain as well will be further focused. So you would also see that how almost everything remains the same except the core demand of the question, right? The introduction, conclusion, main part of the body wherein you're talking about the challenges, etc., remains the same. It's just that a particular heading, which will probably form your 20% of the answer, will change depending upon the question. Move on to the last question for this unit. Do you agree with the view that the civil services in India is losing its neutral and anonymous character? This is nothing but something that we already discussed, specifically in case of the political executive. Here you have to do it overall as well. So we have already talked about political neutrality. In this case, you have to also talk about value neutrality and complete the answer, right? And anonymity. So introduction brief about civil services neutrality and anonymity, background in brief, then in present context, and then measures and conclusion. Neutrality and anonymity are two traditional values in the civil services. Neutrality, you define what neutrality would be meaning in civil services, and then you also let us know what anonymity in civil services would mean. Neutrality means politically neutral, non-partisan, discompassionate, dehumanized. So this is value neutrality, and this is political neutrality. And not indulging in politics. Anonymity means the impersonal role of the civil servants dominating over the personal role. It is related to ministerial responsibility and civil servant anonymity, that the civil servant works behind the curtain. Why is it supposed to be? Because there's a responsibility of the minister. Neutrality and anonymity indicate that civil servant should not show his personal things more, rather than they should be subordinated, and civil servant is not supposed to criticize government and remain politically neutral. What with the background, Indian civil services have been politically neutral till the 1970s, as there was balanced polity. Then you talk about how unbalanced polity came into place. However, around 1960s, 70s, the doctrine of committed bureaucracy replaced it, and so the neutral and anonymous character of civil services went away. Even today, the neutrality of the civil services is being questioned increasingly, although there are institutions which are constitutionally independent, such as ECI, CAG, and UPSC. Present context: increasing use of social media has become an ego needs of civil servants than this is, and therefore this is creating a conflict with the traditional values of neutrality and anonymity. This was highly in news, so you can also directly include it in your answer in the present context. You know that yes, so we are giving an example here. For instance, one IS officer has been show caused for writing Rapistan. A MP civil servant wrote a post critiquing the Kashmir files. You know how a civil servant had been sent on voluntary although it was not as voluntary, but voluntary retirement, because they were closing down the park for their own benefits to just have a walk around with the dog, right? So all of these instances, this has become such an increasing trend that even the prime minister has told the civil servants that they should not advertise themselves, but they should advertise the government programs. Even the home minister asked the civil servants to back off from the social media. Again, you can also bring it out in the negative light that they are supposed to be politically neutral as well. The political issues within the union and state also impact the political neutrality of the civil services. They may take a stand as opposed to the union government and obey the state government. For instance, the chief secretary of West Bengal have been asked to report to the DOPT as the union government felt that he did not obey the protocol. There have been such instances in Tamil Nadu as well. So you also talk about the center-state relations, which are getting hampered in such a scenario because of political neutrality. The second ARC recommendations, which would be the probable solutions for such a problem, would be creation of civil services authority, which is depolitization of civil services, restructuring the code of conduct, developing code of ethics, addressing the lacunae vis-a-vis political conduct and ethics, and anonymity code. You also have a you have a combination of the code of conduct and the code of ethics, which was, I am not able to recall the name, but I think second ARC came with it as a public services code, right? Conclusion: although the Hota Committee has observed that the civil services has ceased to become neutral and anonymous, the neutrality is the sheet anchor of politics administration dichotomy and the hallmark of a civil service in a parliamentary democracy. And that is why the recommendations of the second ARC assume immense salience, especially in contemporary times. Right? You've tried to include a committee, you've tried to include a couple of keywords, you've also included a concept of politics administration dichotomy, and then told about how second ARC needs to be implemented. Right, with this, we come to an end to this unit. We'll move on to the next one. Any doubts? We've taken a lot of time, so I'll try to quickly cover up the next one, and then we'll have to give some decent amount of time in the public policy unit. All right. Personal administration, instead of conflicting the employer-employee relationship, just give me a second. Yes. instead of conflicting the employee, instead of conflicts, it must be the employer-employee relationship should be one of mutual alliance. This is basically nothing on but on employer-employee relationship, which is direct part of your written syllabus, right? Introduction about employer-employee relationships. Body, you have to talk about the significance of employer-employee relationships. You have to link them with the various thinkers. To talk about white commissions and joint consultative mechanism, which is directly mentioned in your standard content whenever you read about the employer-employee relationship, right? Peace and harmony in organization is essential for achieving efficiency, and hence employer-employee relationships assume significance. In the body, you talk about employer-employee relationship. What is it? It's a relationship in private sector between the management and the worker, and in public sector between the officers and the employees. This relation assumes significance in modern times due to industrial revolution and expansion of organization, which also for the first time was highlighted by Taylor in the scientific management theory in terms of mental revolution through cooperation between management and workers. Employer-employee relation has incorporated the MP Foley concept of integration and Elton Mayo concept of providing a platform for communication, which is the outlet for ventilation of the grievances. Thus, they encourage behavioral dynamics, like they say that the decision is taken on the basis of consensus, and neither side should impose decision on each other. Do you see how we've tried to include as many thinkers as we can? Behavioral thinkers like Chrysagoras talks about the fusion process, which is the integration of individual goals with the organizational goals, which should improve the mutual reliance of employer and employee. Mutual reliance would also lead to contribution satisfaction equilibrium, as explained by Chester Bernard. How is what we have to majorly focus upon. So practical applications will be Whiteley Commission and GCMs in order to address the increasing conflict between the employer and employees in UK. Whiteley Council was constituted, and due to its success, other countries also adopted such practices. In India, the contemporary of Whiteley mechanisms is the joint consultative mechanism, which came around in 1966. Open communication and trust, recognition and appreciation, shared goals and objectives, shared compensation and benefits. What is the present demand? You have to also talk about the present context, right? The developments like LPG, ICT, NPM, etc. have generated pressure to perform, and also the scope for conflicts increased because of the pressure to perform for the workforce. Today's workforce is aspirational and demanding, and they do not like to be bossed around. They require their views and voices to be heard in the decision making. Therefore, in the era of fourth industrial revolution, workforce retention is a challenge, and the JCM, by dealing with remuneration grievances, etc., can increase employee retention. Thus, there is a need to scale up the meetings of JCM and expand its scope to tackle these contemporary challenges. You can also talk about matrix organizations of MP Foley, how everybody is almost equal to each other. Right? Conclusion, therefore, mutual alignment between employer and employee is imperative for the survival of any organization. Very straightforward, very simple question. You just have to mention, you just have to innovate by interlinking thinkers to the mutual reliance concept. Right. Moving on to the next one. In career advancement, civil servants are necessitated to political superiors, and hence the phenomena poses the challenge to civil service neutrality. This is exactly the same question that we've discussed, just in a different form. Civil service neutrality, career advancements, and political superiors, right? This is nothing but a question on political neutrality. Introduction, body, conclusion. Career advancement, political superiors, civil service neutrality, and reforms are measures to bring about the same. Introduction, civil servants often navigate their careers with hierarchical structures that necessitate interactions with the political superiors. There's a contact with the superiors in the first place because of their hierarchy. So this phenomenon can raise concerns about the potential impact on civil service neutrality, which is fundamental to the functioning of professional and impartial bureaucracy body. Permanent executive works under the political executive, who controls various aspects of career advancement of civil servants, such as, so they have promotions, their transfers, their suspensions, their post-retirement advantages, all of which lies with the political executive. Therefore, there's a higher role of their intervention and interference. There's a lack of objectivity in these advancements, and often depends on the willingness of the political executive. This has led to the doctrine of committed bureaucracy, and which is also rooted in the idea of Westminster culture. It is the politicization of bureaucracy that it started during the Indira Gandhi culture. Honest civil servants are penalized for taking on the corrupt and the nexus between the politicians and the bureaucracy. For example, the case of Sanjeev Chaturvedi, who has been victimized for his anti-corruption crusade, and the recent instances of transfer of the SP in Bareilly. You will heard about Ashok Khemka. So these are some examples that you can directly come from your ethics notes, wherein you're talking about the civil servants who are being honest but being punished. So also this is one unit that you can try to include the ethics examples in. Case study, even the 360-degree appraisal system has resulted into affecting the motivation of some of the civil servants, and the UP IAS Association has openly criticized the lack of transparency in 360 appraisal itself. Even a parliamentary standing committee has criticized the 360-degree appraisal as being arbitrary. Even second ARC has observed that the meritorious and corrupt are rewarded and the honest are punished. And necessitated interactions with political superiors. Again, we're talking about the need for the reasons for it: hierarchy and chain of command. We've already discussed this. Policy implementation and advice. Civil servants play a crucial role in implementing the policies. They may need to work closely with the political leaders to ensure the smooth execution of the government initiatives. Also, we know that they have to be anonymous. So the accountability or the responsibility lies with the ministers. So it's a ministerial responsibility concept. Therefore, you need to have constant interactions. What are the challenges? This is the main demand. Neutrality is the hallmark of the Vivarian model of bureaucracy, which is essential for the smooth functioning. Neutrality is one of the cardinal principles of civil services in India, which is also mentioned in the All India Civil Services Conduct Rules of 1968. However, we have already established the practices which are leading for us to lessening the neutrality. So what are the risks involved? There's a risk of politicization, so excessive dependence on the political superiors for career progression, and may lead to civil servants to prioritize political objectives over the objective and impartial execution. There's a pressure to conform to the ideals of the political executive, which might not be the ideals that of welfare of the people. Civil servants might face pressure to align their recommendations and actions with the preferences of political superiors, potentially compromising their own independence and professional judgment. For example, the Ashok Khemka and Durga Shakti Nagpal, all of these examples can be directly quoted. There is also potential for favoritism. If career advancement is perceived as contingent on political loyalty, there's a risk of favoritism in promotions and assignments, undermining the meritocratic principles of civil services. So you have extension for services, extension in secretariats, etc., etc. What are the reforms and the measures? You can also talk about how 360 already criticizes. So you need to move to a 720 degrees or a holistic overall performance appraisal system, right? Fixed tenure, etc., etc. The present government has introduced a better system of promotion for joint secretary and above on the basis of root criteria, which is ability to perform as well as integrity. This is one of the most important aspects. The Supreme Court has given the direction for constituting an independent civil services commission responsible for posting, promotion, transfer of civil services. Conclusion: politics should intervene in bureaucracy, but should not interfere in bureaucracy, right? There should be an intervening of politics in the bureaucracy because they need to go hand in hand. However, there should not be any interference, which will also help India move towards a balanced polity with diffracted features, and this can enable the civil servants to maintain its neutrality. Nothing but a very similar and almost same answer of what we've already discussed. Again, coming on the training. So we have training is not a short affair. Rather, it is a step-by-step process of developing skills, habits, knowledge, and aptitude. We just align whatever you've read about training in terms of the questions. So skills, habits, knowledge, and aptitude. In introduction, you have to define the gives the basics of training or define what training is. Significance of training. After the significance, you have to tell us how it is a step-by-step process for these four things: skills, habits, knowledge, and aptitude. And then you have to conclude, right? Training is required to equip public administration with the required aptitude and attitude for meeting the changing goals of the state and the increasing demands of citizens. It is an organized process for increasing the knowledge and skill of the employees. We've tried to link it with skills and knowledge here. The field of training has evolved, and on the basis of that, it has following types like short-term training, long-term training, skill training, background training, etc. Significance of training is that the civil servants need to be trained from different perspectives. Different organizations have different types of needs. Just a second. Just give me a second. I'll be back. Yes, I'm really sorry. Yeah, so you're discussing about the significance of training is that the civil service servants need to be trained from different perspectives. Different organizations have different types of needs, and on the basis of the needs, the trainings have to be defined. Therefore, training has been emphasized by classical thinkers. For example, Henry Fayol discussed training for administrators, whereas Taylor focused on worker training. Now we are directly hitting on the thesis statement, which is a step-by-step process of developing skills, habits, knowledge, and aptitude. To encourage self-development, to achieve the organizational goals, to ensure the development of a proper work ethos in the organization, fostering of team spirit, to impart knowledge and skills necessary for performing the job efficiently and effectively, and to keep the employees to acquire necessary conceptual, technical, managerial, and human skills, to make available an adequate number of sufficiently trained manpower to meet the diverse needs of the organization. The new innovation that you can bring about in the answer is how to achieve this. So there are various types of training like short term and long term, skill, background, professional, etc., which you already discussed. You can also draw a diagram of the different types of training methodologies that you know from your basic study content. Traditional training techniques are more skill oriented, basically focusing on how we can impart skills and knowledges, because skills or knowledge, because the civil servants need to have skill and knowledge. Legal knowledge, procedure knowledge, etc. are important and they're considered relevant. These techniques deal with aptitude knowledge side of the training. We are trying to include only those keywords the question is asking, right? Developments like HRD, organizational development, a governance paradigm, etc. necessitated changes in the training method. And this is, so we have talked about the aptitude and knowledge. We also talk about the attitude and behavior, right? So attitude, behavior, outlook, motivation, interpersonal competence, etc. These are the contemporary and modern training techniques, such as the Kiran Agarwal committee has also recommended for the introduction of 2 methods of training: mentoring and pedagogy methods, so that the lecture method is made more interactive and effective. You basically try to include committees and tell us what are the modern methodologies and how are they more helpful for attitude and behavioral component. The need for responsive and citizen-centric administration resulted in restructuring the training focus, and now there is both aptitude as well as attitude as the focus of training. So you have aptitude as well as attitude, and this is main demand of the question. Aptitude is necessary for ease of doing business, and attitude is necessary for the ease of living. When there are changes like ICT, digitalization, triple P, etc., the skills of the civil servants becomes more important. The civil services of today requires both competencies, technical as well as behavioral. This is nothing but aptitude and attitude. This is also advocated by the Kiran committee, which is already discussed. Conclusion: a training program needs to be put into effect according to a definite plan, because again, we know that the question was a step-by-step process. So you need a definite plan or a definite path and procedure for proper implementation. That's why the Mission Karmyogi has been launched by the Government of India, which integrates both the aptitudinal and the attitudinal aspects of training. So we've talked about how it's a step-by-step, as well as talked about how it's not only about the knowledge and aptitude, but also about habits and skills. So habit would form a part of your attitude, whereas everything else would be part of your aptitude. Right. Next, the environment and situational conditions under which the government operates have an important bearing on its HRD practices examine. So we have to basically link about how the external environment influences the human resource development practices. Try to also make it specific to, so HRD is overall private plus public, but in the context of India, in specificity, try to mention about the Indian administration examples, right? So the environment and situation conditions under which the government operates has an important bearing on HRD practices. You have to examine introduction about HRD, body about the significance of HRD, tell us about how situation and environment impacts on HRD, and then examine the other factors and conclude. Introduction: human resource development is among the most significant activities of the personal administration. Traditionally, the human in organization was conferred as a cog in the wheel, but due to human relations and behavioral theory coming in, you can also about the external contingency theory coming in, human is treated as a capital in the organization, and that's how the concept of human resource development has emerged. HRD is a direct topic in your syllabus. You must have a half of or a one pager on HRD. Directly pick up from there. What is the significance is about development of human resources so that its fullest potential is utilized by state in general and government in particular. In the field of administration, HRD is a holistic concept that focuses on both direct and indirect interventions for developing and scaling of human resources. The direct and indirect interventions for developing and scaling. It focuses on attitude and aptitude for the personnel in administration. Some of them are, for example, coping with the social transformation. It leads to proper utilization of the human potential, preservation and re-energizing of human resources, coping with the technological, organizational, business changes, meeting the manpower needs, etc. Directly hitting on the thesis statement or the main demand of the question, which is the impact of environment and situational conditions. And you have to also facilitate your answer by examples in this very heading. So HRD is a dynamic concept as it keeps on changing with the changes in the society, organization, as well as system. It needs to keep itself updated with the changing needs and priorities of the organization. So, for example, post-independence India went for a socialistic method of development led by bureaucracy. Hence, bureaucracy was given multiple roles, that is regulation, development, welfare, managerial, PSUs, etc. However, post 1991, with the adoption of LPG, the focus shifted more on specialization, lateral entry, networking governance, regulatory governance. And you can say that today, moving away from control to regulation, we have to now move to facilitation, right? So the changes are constant and keep on coming in, and therefore we need to shift our human resources in such a manner as well. So this shift changed the demands of the human resources, and so the change in HRD processes, that is recruitment, training, etc. Bring about some present context. The personal processes are undergoing changes, be it USA, India, UK, or any other country. For instance, recently, Indian government has introduced Mission Karma Yogi to take HRD to a higher level, as it will lead to development of holistic competence. You have to see how you have to repeat the basic content that you've read almost everywhere, because almost every year 2 questions are asked, right? So you will see it as a repetition because you're looking at all the answers from all the years, but you need to understand that this is something you have to keep universal, uh, because your content is limited, right? And only 2 questions are asked every year. So today, the objective of the state is not only security and stability, but also innovation, social justice, citizen-centeredness, ease of living, etc. The personnel in the organization needs to be molded with the perspective of the objectives of the state, or else it would not be able to deliver. If the goal is social justice, then ethos needed to be imbibed. And if the goal is innovation, then attitude needs to be changed. So we're basically talking about how attitudinal and aptitudinal changes needs to be done. And that is why there's an emphasis on 4 E's, which is also equity, right? HRD is not only driven by situation and environment, but also the factors. Here you can see, depending on the marks of the question, it's a 15 marker, right? So you can, and because you have to examine, so you have to also tell us that it is not only the environment and the situational conditions, but also other conditions. And what are those other conditions? Stability, order, bureaucratic attitudes, the 4 E's, etc., etc. Now, this basically is nothing but an extrapolation of the structural aspects of bureaucracy. And then you can conclude with whatever you want to conclude directly with an initiative or a committee, etc. Performance problems are rarely caused simply by lack of training, and rarely can performance be improved by training alone. Critically analyze the statement, understanding that it is a critically analyzed, so you have to negate the statement as well as talk about it. So you have to say how performance can be linked to training. However, it is not only training which the performance is linked to, right? So tell us all the other processes such as recruitment, hierarchy, pay and service conditions, rank and position classification, etc. But you have to also critically analyze. So you say that training is also very, very important. That is how you will critically analyze the statement given in the question. The question says that training alone is not sufficient, but critically analysis would mean that training is very, very important as well. So you have to talk about both the aspects, keep major focus on training, and then some subtle focus on the other aspects of human resource development practices. Introduction, basics about training and performance, body, brief about types of training, significance, thesis statement, critically analyze, justification with examples, and conclusion. Introduction, training is a deliberate act to bring about desired changes in personnel in terms of aptitude. Attitude is something which you've repeated a lot. I'll skip it. Body also you've picked up from previously only. Now, the role of training in improving the performance. You need skill development, you have capacity building, you have behavioral changes, you have sensitivity training. Now, because the thesis statement asks you that it is not only training alone. So factors other than the training that impacts the performance, the organization's culture, autonomy, management system, 4 of Likert, HRD practices such as recruitment, objective performance appraisal, promotion, transfers, which I've already talked about. The style of leadership. Now here you can try to bring in any thinker from the leadership theories, job design and clarity of roles, Chris Agaris metric structure, or MP4 is metric organization, communication as per Chester Bernard, fusion process of Chris Agaris, motivation and rewards. So you have inducements, etc. Right? Yeah. Give out some facts. Second ARC has highlighted that training modules are not regularly updated or improved, and there is a uniform pattern of training, and all individuals are given same type of training. All of this is something which I've picked up from previous only. Hence, apart from training, other factors such as ecology, leadership style, etc., needs to be improved to have a greater impact on performance of employees. Here, you have to just, as I said, you have to also talk about the weaknesses associated with training and also give out the solutions. So majorly you have to talk about training, but also talk about how training alone is not sufficient, but other factors are also needed. And then come back to conclude that it all starts with training, right? The first step is training, so training is important. That is the structure basically. Talk about the importance of training, then talk about how training alone is not important, other factors need to be coming into play, and then finally talk about why training is the first step, and therefore it becomes very, very important. Any doubts? Any doubts? Okay. Move on to the next one now. Most civil service regimes still equate the public sector ethics with anti-corruption efforts. Discuss the insufficiency of ethics codes in this background. We have to say that ethics is not all about anti-corruption only, right? Okay. Brief about the ethics in administration and the code of conduct or code of ethics. Some details about the code of ethics. Public sector ethics still equated with anti-corruption efforts. This is the main thesis statement. Insufficiency of the ethics codes, whereas it's not only anti-corruption. And then way forward, right? Ethics in administration is a subfield of public administration, which aims at establishing a code of conduct as well as a code of ethics for the public servants. The code of ethics for the civil servants set forth the rules of conduct for civil servants and the ethical principles governing the dealings of civil servants in the performance of their official duties. The purpose of code of ethics is to promote ethical principles and values in the conduct of civil servants acting in their official capacity. Rationale behind the code of ethics is to create an effective deterrence against corruption and to promote integrity and accountability. Talking about the code of ethics in its entirety, so the objectives would be largely dealing with the do's of conduct, spirit side of law, building the internal checks and balances, dealing with the responsibility, qualitative and substantial in nature. Give out some examples. For example, in countries like USA, there is a Department of Ethics. In UK, you had the Nodal Committee, which came out of the 7 key principles which deal with ethics of the public services. But in India, there's a lack of proper institutionalization with respect to ethics. The civil servants in India are governed by All India Services or Civil Service Conduct Rules, Prevention of Corruption Act, etc. Public sector ethics still equated with anti-corruption efforts. So to tell us how for us ethics still is only anti-corruption. And then we'll talk about how it is insufficient, because apart from anti-corruption, we need more other things. Also, it is also insufficient for corruption itself, right? So corruption through rent-seeking, nexus, etc., becomes systemic in prismatic society. Talk about how corruption is both systemic and systematic. That is, it is guided by various systems, it impacts all the systems, and it is systematic in the sense it is structural now. The discretion of the administration leads to rampant corruption, as was seen in the 2G scam, Vyapam scam, etc. Even in land acquisition process in India, this phenomena is seen. Siphoning off of funds allocated for welfare and development for personal enrichment becomes the norm, as was seen in the Kerala case, where the CAG found that the police officers' residences have refurbished or built with the funds that were actually allocated for police modernization. However, apart from visible corruption, there is also moral corruption. Talk about the intangible aspects of corruption, such as non-performance of duty, inefficiency, and professional attitude, nepotism, politicization, etc. Insufficiency of ethics code, narrow focus on corruption and an entire gamut of ethical principles and values, ambiguity and lack of clarity, and adequate. You are not giving them adequate enforcement mechanisms. It is reactive rather than proactive. It's just a list of do's and don'ts, and it is not as descriptive as it should be, catering to the situations. There's no empirical evidence. There's no situational guidelines. Also talk about how it has less focus on other things as well. Right. Way forward, second ARC says you need a public services code. What is a public services code? It is nothing but a code of conduct plus code of ethics. Try to differentiate between what code of conduct and code of ethics is. This is don'ts, this is do's, and you need a public service code which gives you both. Must also contain values such as honesty, neutrality, impartiality, empathy. This is something which is lacking in the present code of ethics. The second ARC also recommended a civil services code which combines the legal and moral aspects of civil services working. Conclusion: administrative ethics is not only about the evaluation of conduct based on quantitative measures such as corruption. Rather, it is also about analyzing the problems of ethics in administration and bringing ethical standards, which is very qualitative in nature. Right. One of these are nothing but one questions on each part of the syllabus, and you have to basically keep on repeating things. That is how we're keeping it fast. If you have any doubts, you can stop me in between and let me know about it. Yes. Okay. Performance appraisal needs to be seen beyond the mere suitability of the official for vertical promotion. Primarily talking about how performance appraisal should be 360 degree, 720 degree, holistic, overall competency, etc., etc. We have to move away from the vertical promotion, also look at the horizontality of it. Performance appraisal significance beyond vertical promotion and conclusion. A performance appraisal is a systematic and periodic process that assesses an individual's employee job performance and productivity in relation to certain pre-established criteria and organizational objectives. The objectives of performance appraisal would be supervision and control, performance feedback, knowing the strengths and weaknesses, employee training, and developmental decisions. How we have to move beyond the vertical promotion, how we have to move beyond the unidirectionality, the singularness in direction would be performance appraisal has evolved from traditional to modern methods as the demands and aspirations of the employees and performance needs of the organization changed. Performance appraisal is more than mere work assessment. It is a management developing activity and is a process which facilitates the development of an organizational climate of mutuality, openness, and collaboration towards achievement of individual as well as organizational goals. It leads to it leads to satisfaction of the ego needs of the employees. It can be used for job enrichment, job loading, vertical job loading, etc., etc. It can also lead to contribution satisfaction equilibrium and feeling equity as explained by the equity theory of motivation, to evaluate the attitude and aptitude, etc. So for example, today we have an online assessment for performance appraisal. We have Sparrow, Probity and Solve. So Sparrow, Smart Performance Appraisal Reporting, Recording Online Video for online writing of annual performance appraisal reports, in which the performance appraisal reports and 360 appraisals have been incorporated. And you have to talk about how or what all inputs are coming in from 360 degree and what are the values that they are working on. So control, efficiency, assignment, etc., etc. Also, you can talk about the multiple stakeholders that are getting involved in 360-degree performance appraisal. Conclusion, that's why the performance appraisal is a continuous improvement process. Performance appraisal plays a very significant role in establishing any organizations as professional organization, and hence it should be seen beyond the mere suitability of the office of vertical promotion and also for job enrichment. Attitude as well as aptitude of employees in the organization is necessary to be assessed. Moving to the last question for this unit, civil servants generally tend to exhibit the values and ethical frameworks of the political executives under whom they function. Agree or not agree, explain. So you say that yes, this happens, give down examples of the negatives, and then say that this should not happen. How will it not happen? By ensuring political and value neutrality, and how will you ensure such neutrality is what the main demand of the question is. I'll repeat the question for you. Civil servants generally tend to exhibit the values and ethical framework of the political executives under whom they function. Explain. Right? As politics controls the administration, the values and standards of political executives have a significant impact on civil servants. We have just told as to why they have an impact, because it is the direct control of the politics over the administration. Fredericks, in his paper, The Ecology of Public Administration, explains the impact of various subsystems on the administration, among which political subsystem has a profound influence on administrative system. You can directly include this because you talk about the ecology or the surrounding environment, which is politics in this case. Talk about the systems approach that was given by David Easton and say that the political subsystem here influences the most. It is politics which frames the policies and programs, and civil servants have to implement those policies and programs. That is why the values of political executives influences the working of civil servants, such as inclusiveness, equity, etc. At the same time, it is also having some negative influence. We've talked about the positive or the theoretical aspect of it. Now tell us negative about it. So negative influence on admission is the ethical practices and principles with respect to politics. They lack clarity and they're not institutionalized. Therefore, as politics and the administration, ethics in politics is also necessary to prevent the misconduct and corruption. It is what Rex called as explain the balanced and unbalanced polity, talk about the value neutrality and the political neutrality of Max Weber, talk about how Paul Appleby explained the civil services neutrality as policy neutrality and program commitment, that civil servants are neutral if you have neutrality in terms of the policy and there's a commitment to the program at hand. Give out a case study of India and divide it into phases as to what were the phases of bureaucracy in terms of their neutrality. So phase 1, 1947 to 60s, the bureaucracy was neutral and the polity was balanced. In the phase 2, between 1960s and 80s, primarily during the time of a committed bureaucracy. So you had bureaucracy which was committed and the politics was starting to getting criminalized. So there was criminalization of politics. Then in the phase 3, between 1990s to 2010s, you had moving away from committed bureaucracy to politicization of the bureaucracy. And now 2014 onwards, we are trying to attempt to reverse the trend by bringing in various initiatives such as Sparrow, Probity, Solve, Mission Karmyogi, IGOT platforms, etc., etc. What are your suggestions or measures for ensuring neutrality? Again, ARC second has recommended for a public service code and civil services authority, ethics commissioner for parliament for institutionalization of ethics of public servants, social audit. Second ARC recommendation in terms of comprehensive civil services code consisting of the code conduct rules, code of ethics, and code of conduct as well. Conclusion, as without ethics in politics, there will not be ethics in administration. Therefore, institutionalization of ethics for politics is necessary, along with strengthening and streamlining the existing mechanisms of civil service. With this, we come to an end of this unit. If you have any doubts, you can please let me know. Otherwise, move on to the public policy unit. Yes. Can we move on to the next one? Guys, I hope I'm audible. Yes, thank you for the response. We'll move on to the final unit, which is public policy. Yes, this is one of the most important units. So please try to attempt the questions yourselves as well, and you can reach out if you have any doubts about them. Uh, but in this particular unit, you have to, try your best to include as many examples from the present Indian administration as you can, because this is all what public policy is about. Entire public administration is about public policy. Try to include as many keywords such as Beagle factor, and then Peter's principle, Parkinson's law, etc., as you can. Try to talk about the incrementalism wherever you can, right? So these are some 4-5 keywords that belong to this unit. You have to try to incorporate them in any answer that you come forward to. Any which ways, moving on, cost benefit analysis is of great help to the policy makers in framing policies and providing the advice on developing public policy. Examine although a question in public policy, but cost benefit analysis, again, you talk about rational paradigm, incrementalist paradigm, strategic planning paradigm, talk about some examples, talk about how cost benefit was given by which thinkers. For example, Simon, you can link it with them. You can also bring about an example. So, for example, triple P, there are various modes of triple P. You have a bot model, transfer model, etc. So which one do you want to prefer? Give it via cost benefit analysis. But again, it's a 10 marker, so you have to be very specific. Public policy making is a complex process that involves many participants with different roles, interests, and resources. The study of public policy is the study of who gets what, why, and what difference it makes. Various techniques are involved in reaching sound and rational policy and in converting policy proposals into the policy. A variety of techniques and tools are used for improvement and enhancing the policy formulation process. So we have started to hit the core demand from here. So some of the techniques include the cost benefit analysis, the economic forecasting, the operations, the research and systems analysis, and the PPBS approach. This is the programming, planning, budgeting, and technique. Cost benefit analysis is the main demand, so we'll directly hit on that. Cost benefit analysis is a process which is used by the governments to make and evaluate public policy through the quantification of consequences. You know that cost benefit analysis is not a qualitative aspect. So you talk about how you have quantified the consequences and then you make a decision based on the quantification of those consequences. Government uses CBA to make public policy decisions because it maximizes the financial resources in order to yield the greatest net benefit of welfare, right? Quantitatively again. So example, this technique is of great help to the policymakers while framing gender-specific policies and offers advice in the formulation and development of public policy. The costs of a policy program are calculated and set against the benefits it can offer to women or the gender in concern. Thus, the potential benefit of the policy is calculated. This technique helps the policymaker to opt for a policy program which offers the maximum net benefit to women. So you've talked about what would be the cost associated with it, what would, and balance it against the benefits. And we have to minimize the costs and maximize the benefits in the sense and maintain a subtle balance between them. And because the questions are directive at examines, we will also talk about how, however, critics argue that everything cannot be quantified. So you also talk about other methods which you already introduced in the introduction. So cannot be quantified while framing policies for gender, equity, and equality. Values are also involved more than calculations. Therefore, it would be difficult to make calculations for subject of value. Its hyperfixation on monetary costs can be problematic for legislating large, diverse, and complex societies. What are the factors? Whether or not public policy is promoting the balanced regional development, whether or not public policy is protecting ecological systems, whether or not public policy is empowering women and people at the bottom of the pyramid, its normative impact on the society, meaning how a policy impacts the social norms or behavior of a society. All of this is something which cannot be quantified, right? That is why cost benefit analysis is not the only solution. You have to also talk about the other solutions. So CBA is important for eliminating absurd or uneconomical policies from consideration, though it does not consider all of the important factors that should be measured while making public policy. Therefore, a multidimensional and a multi-stakeholder approach should be adopted while taking policy decisions. Fair enough. More on the next question. Public policy making is an effort to apply the methods of political analysis to policy areas, but has concerns with the processes inside the bureaucracy and stakeholders. So to basically talk about, there's also previous question on how public policy is all about politics, right? So we have to say that public policy making is an effort to apply the methods of political analysis to policy areas, which is nothing but how public policy is nothing but politics. And the second part of the question is that it also has concerns with regards to processes inside the bureaucracy and stakeholders. So you have to also talk about the issues pertaining to the bureaucracy in terms of public policy implementation or formulation as such. So we'll start by the introduction by defining public policy, and we'll also give it the process or cycle of public policy, because we're also involving the politics, the bureaucracy, and the stakeholders. So this is nothing but the cycle in itself. Then we'll talk about the thesis statement, wherein we'll be trying to talk about the methods of political analysis to policy areas. Then we'll try to address what are the concerns within the bureaucracy and the stakeholders themselves, and then way forward and then conclude, right? The policy making process has been regarded by David Easton as a black box model, which converts the demands of the society into policies. So input is demands. There's a black box process that is happening, which you don't know what it is. And then the output is policies, right? This is the David Easton systems model on public policy. So black box, which converts the demands of the society into policies. While analyzing the political systems, David Easton argues that the political system is that part of the society which is engaged in the authoritative allocation of values. Body methods of political analysis to policy areas. Public policy deals with the decisions of the government. It provides broad guidelines for the administration and other agencies to carry out their specific responsibilities. There are many policies such as education, health, telecom, etc. These policies reflect what the governments do in these particular fields. So this is nothing but political statements reflected via policies. So the political actors are the legislature, the executive, the administration, the political parties, etc. Here you're trying to include the to diversify the political actors, so that you can give justice to the public policy cycle. This interface leads to policy discourse among these actors, which leads to shaping the nature and content of the policy. It is in this context, it is said that policy is the authoritative allocation of values. The nature of politics ultimately influences every aspect of the policy cycle, including the agenda setting, policy formulation, etc. Thus, politics determines the entire gamut of the policy process, and the policy output is the outcome of the actions of the politics. David Easton's political system model illustrates this process. Even if you do not know this, that's okay. It's too much in detail, but still. So we have here tried to establish how policy is all about politics. Yes, so we have tried to include the diversification in terms of the actors, so legislature, executive, administration, political parties, how they decide the discourse of the policy, which ultimately leads to changing the shaping the nature and content of the policy in the first place. That is why we say that it is authoritative allocation of values. It is only the policy which influences the agenda setting as well as the policy formulation, etc. Therefore, the entire gamut of the process is defined in terms of politics. Right. So if you have a look at the political subsystem given by David Easton, you know that the inputs are going into the political system and coming out in the form of outputs. What are the outputs? The outputs are decisions and actions, and the inputs are the demands and the support of the society. And then these decisions and actions are then again fed as an input, which goes into the political system to come out with better decisions and actions. Hitting on the second part of the thesis statement, which is concerned inside the bureaucracy and the stakeholders. What are the concerns? The policy process is a complex exercise involving multiple stakeholders, their interests and demands and values. The system approach to policy making by Easton is also demonstrated this aspect. Policy implementation is one of the most important part of the policy cycle, which is done by the bureaucracy. Therefore, the success or failure of policy depends too much on the bureaucrats. There are various concerns. Now talk about the concerns with regards to bureaucracy. So bureaucratic priorities may differ from political priorities. This is again, the political priority would be short-term political gain. versus an ideal bureaucratic priority should be long-term economic sustainability, right? Then there can be a lack of commitment due to various reasons, as red tapeism, silo mentality, my-bab cultures, treating citizens as slaves or or to be overpowered rather than them to be empowered. Then there's a conflict of values and interests. For example, e-governance reforms are resisted by bureaucracy as it lead to more accountability and responsiveness. Their behavior of self-aggrandizing and utility maximizing is another problem. Now here you talk about various stakeholders. So with the emergence of multi-actor paradigm, there is also significant presence of contribution of other stakeholders, just private and civil society organizations, self-help groups, community-based organizations, media, people themselves. In policy making and in governance, they can directly participate in the processes as a stakeholder, or they can give policy inputs. They can force the government to bring change in policy, and they can also carry out research. In this way, they can help the citizen and the government, hence they have become the mobilizing force. For example, recently farm laws were repealed due to strong opposition from the farmers group. We're talking about the pressure groups and the lobby, how Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan, that is the MKSS, mobilized people for social audit, or the participation in environmental policies and governance processes as far as the Society for Civil Environment is concerned. Way forward, strategic planning paradigm. I told you how to include the paradigms, so combination of the incremental and the rationalist paradigm to include to the strategic planning paradigm, which was given by Chandler, right? So conclusion, however, it is not only political, but also social, economic, and various other factors. This is again a new dimension that you're trying to add, that it is not only political, but also social, economic, and various other factors, which also influence the public policy. In governance paradigm, politics is an important stakeholder, and the market and the civil society also important participants in the policy making process, along with the bureaucracy. These are the three stakeholders that question introduced, right? So politics, civil society, and bureaucracy. Fair enough. This is how you have to answer this question. Moving on to the next one. Next one is a very simple one. So it says policy evaluation contributes fundamentally to the sound public governance. Discuss. It is nothing but you have to discuss on policy evaluation. That's it. So define policy evaluation, link it to public governance. In terms of public governance, you can also talk about good governance and the objective of public governance being the welfare of people. Why it is needed, and the thesis statement conclude. Policy evaluation can be briefly described as a procedure that appraises the worthwhileness of a policy, and considers the special context and political and economic variables of the situation. This is nothing but a standard definition and evaluation that you can directly pick up and put. What is the body? Through evaluation, we can determine whether a policy's effects are intended or unintended, and whether the results are positive or negative for the target population and society as a whole. The Niti Aayog has the Development Monitoring and Evaluation Office, DMEO, the Development Monitoring and Evaluation Office, as an attached office which carries out evaluation in programs and schemes. Please learn this and please use this wherever you want to talk about policy evaluation. The Development Monitoring and Evaluation Office of Niti Aayog. Policy evaluation contributing to sound public governance. So policy evaluation contributes significantly to sound public governance. How? Because it can help governments to improve the design and implementation of public policies that in turn can lead to prosperity for the country and the well-being of citizens. You tell us how basically evaluation is now acting as input to formulate new policies and helping in contributing the cycle in the first place. Right? How? So policy evaluation helps in knowing not only the flaws, but also the administrative machineries involved. It helps in providing accountability for resources. For example, social audit of Maganrega is nothing but a performance evaluation concept. So social audit will help us in maintaining accountability. It will also help us in promoting transparency and responsibility, holds responsibility. Equity audit leads to inclusiveness and efficiency. So we're basically talking about different types of audits or evaluation techniques, one of which could be the equity audit, which will now lead us to know whether or not inclusive and efficient delivery of public services has been done. It will help us in minimizing corruption and misutilization. It will help in promoting greater participation of all the other stakeholders as well. It will help us in giving us an evidence-based decision making, because if only when we undergo evaluation do we have some concrete figures in terms of quantitative data of evidence. So evidence-based decision making for a better future. Right? Informing future policies. Conclusion, policy evaluation contributes to promoting accountability, learning, and increasing public sector effectiveness through improvised decision-making, greater participation, and hence promotes sound public governance. Very simple question, nothing but policy evaluation, right? Lindblom regarded rational decision making as an unattainable goal. In the light of the statement, suggest measures to avoid policy failures. The major part of the question is policy failure, right? So basically, it is nothing but policy implementation. You tell us why policy implementation is a failure. The generic points that you have on policy implementation as a failure, you give us the solutions for it. This is the main part of the question. Try to link it with how rational decision making is an unattainable goal. You just have to give a couple of lines on this thesis statement, which is it is regarded as a rational decision making as an unattainable goal. However, the main demand still lies here. So even if you did not know this, which a lot of people back at that time did not, you can directly hit on this. Brief introduction about the rational incremental model, then talk about why Lindblom rejected the rational model, because here he said that rational decision making is an attainable goal. Give out the incremental model in brief, and then measures to avoid policy failures is the main demand, and then conclude. Introduction: the field of public policy is experienced two broad approaches, rationalist and incrementalist. The rationalist approach to policy making is based on root approach. Incrementalist adopts a branch approach to policy making. Okay. Body rejected the rational model. Lindblom first presented the incremental model in the course of a critique of the rational model of decision making. According to Lindblom, constraints of time, information, and cost prevent policymakers from identifying the full range of policy alternatives and their consequences. Constraints of politics prevent the establishment of clear-cut societal goals and accurate calculation of cost. And this is nothing but whenever you have a read on the public policy content from rationalist and incrementalist paradigm, nothing but an enunciation on that. Again, this is not the major part of the question, so do not be intimidated by it. It can result into risk or chaos. This is nothing but the criticism given by Lindblom for the rationalist model. There's a big risk of policy failures. A country can't have its radical changes. Knowledge has its own limitations. Then you give out the incremental model that Lindblom talked about. So according to incrementalism, the policymakers examine a limited number of policy alternatives and implement changes in a series of small steps. But again, this is also very negative. Why? Because you only focus on incremental changes, which are nothing but insignificant improvements, just to counter the revolution which can be brought about by people, right? So this approach recognizes the less than ideal circumstances under which administrators must make policies. He contends that incrementalism is a typical policy making in pluralist societies. Decisions and policies are the product of give and take mutual consent among numerous participants in the policy. Main demand measures to avoid policy failures. Before that, also tell us why there's public policy failures. You talk about the incrementalist paradigm, negatives, rationalist paradigm. You talk about bureaucracy as a whole, which is implementing, has a lot of failures, so that tapeism, corruption, nepotism, status quoism, etc., etc. Tell us other reasons. For example, you do not focus on outcomes. We only focus on outputs, etc., etc. Sensitivity training is lacking. Then you talk about the measures directly opposite. So strategic incrementalism, evidence-based policy making, decentralization, financial resources, bureaucratic cooperation, people participation, institutional capacity, etc. But Lindblom's model is only one aspect of public policy making, and rationalist policy making model has its own relevance. In fact, today there are also integrated models. So you talk about the strategic planning paradigm, right? Which helps to overcome the weaknesses of both, such as mixed scanning model, strategic planning model, or punctuated equilibrium model. Fair enough. The next question now is failure of public policies has been often attributed to problems with implementation, while implementers question the policy design, discuss the contestation. It is basically saying that public policy is failing, and when it fails, the people who are implementing it put the blame on policy design, wherein so implementers, which is the bureaucrats, say that it is the policy is failing because the policy formulation was bad, which was done by the political executive, and the political executive say that the policy implementation by the bureaucrats was bad, hence it is failing. There's this contestation, so discuss it. Basically, we'll say that it is because of both, that there's a beagle factor existing in terms of political executive. They're sitting at the top, they do not know what the ground realities are, therefore design is not sufficient. We'll talk about the negatives of bureaucracy in terms of implementation, which we've already done a lot of times. We'll discuss this contestation, and then we'll come out with solutions to ensure better cooperation and come out with better policy designs, right? Okay. Policy design and policy implementation are the two significant components of the public policy. This is nothing but policy formulation, and this is nothing but policy implementation. This is done by bureaucracy, and this is done by political executive. Policy design and implementation are considered two separate steps in the policy process diagram. There is also the concept of politics, administration, dichotomy, and the policy is designed by politics and implemented by administration. Thus, both these activities are conceived as separate and distinct. However, policy implementation cannot be separated from policy making and vice versa, and a watertight division is counterproductive. Consider setting, formulation, adoption, implementation, evaluation, nothing but a public policy diagram, public policy cycle diagram. Talk about the contestation. The contestation between policy design and implementation is a long-standing debate in the realm of public administration. Policymakers often attribute the failure of public policies to problems in implementation, while implementers argue that the root of the problem lies in the policy design itself. Talking about both policy design and then policy implementation, the problems and why. So the policy will be more successful if policymakers have made objectives very clear. While policy making, for instance, a policy that lacks clarity in its objectives or fails to identify the appropriate target groups may face challenges during implementation. Moreover, a policy that does not consider the existing administrative capacities of the socioeconomic context may face difficulties. For example, Integrated Child Development Services Scheme in India, despite being a well-intentioned policy aimed at addressing the malnutrition and health issues among the children, yet the scheme has faced several challenges due to its policy design flaws. For instance, they include lack of clear guidelines, inadequate budgetary provisions, poor targeting of beneficiaries. As a result, the implementation has not yielded the desired results. Now we talk about implementation. On the other hand, implementers argue that even a well-designed policy can fail if the implementation process is not efficient. This is what the designers would say, right? So they assert that several factors, such as lack of coordination among implementing agencies, bureaucratic delays, corruption, inadequate capacities, goal displacement, attitude of status quoism, lack of sensitivity, etc., can hinder the implementation of public policies. In India, we have so many policies, but generally there is a lack of implementation. There are many schemes such as RT, Maganrega, Food Security Act, National Food Security Act, Right to Work, Jan Dhan Yojana, etc. But largely is concerned how to implement them. Way forward, you have to talk about the solutions now. This is very, very important. Improve the line and staff relations. What is staff? The staff is policy makers, line is policy implementers, right? So improve the line and staff relations. Interdepartmental transfers are needed. So you need to move from line to staff and staff to line. That is why interdepartmental transfers. Line organization members should also be given opportunity. The staff organization at decision making level. This is nothing but to give the experience of both. Objective performance appraisal, impartial feedback mechanism. Also talk about other things. So for example, policy design, how can we make it better? So you have to look at cost benefit analysis. You have to look at the ground realities, take a social audit in importance, look at program evaluation measures in public place. For policy design, for policy implementation, talk about the sensitivity training needed for bureaucracy, talk about the change in structures and attitudes and behaviors, moving away from vertical hierarchy to horizontal hierarchy. So moving away from hierarchy to heterarchy, etc., etc. Conclusion: a successful public policy requires not only a well-designed framework, but also an efficient implementation mechanism. Right? Any problems? None. Moving on, policy problems are increasingly tending towards being wicked. Discuss the capacity and preparedness of the state to tackle this problem. Nothing but an overall policy-based question, public policy-based question. Policy problems are increasingly tending towards being wicked. Nothing but the new challenges are coming into play. Discuss the capacity and preparedness of the state to tackle such problems. We'll say that no, it is not enough capacity and prepared. Why is it not enough capacity and prepared? What are the new challenges, or what is the wickedness? Why is it not prepared? And thirdly, how can we make it prepared? Which is the solutions, right? Okay. Public policy, again, a standard introduction. So public policy deals policy of the government, dealing with what the government chooses to do or not choose to do. This is nothing but another definition of public policy. It is also a separate field of public administration. It will also become a core aspect. The policy is a purposive course of action in dealing with a problem or a matter of concern within a specific time frame. How is the body wicked problems? What are wicked? So they're complex, ill-defined, and multiple causes and solutions that often contradict each other. These problems don't have a definitive formulation, and their solutions require innovation and adaptation. Examples of wicked problems may include climate change, poverty, terrorism, social inequality, all the new problems, right? In policy making, there is no black and white decisions. Rather, the decisions are mostly gray. That is for the benefit of some and harm others. There is something which you also read in Pareto improvements, right? So this is coming from there. For example, you have an economic growth versus sustainable development. So rapid economic growth is necessary to reduce the poverty, whereas it would come at the cost of environmental degradation. So these are some wicked problems. You're giving out an example. So tackling wicked problems requires effective public administration, multidisciplinary collaboration, and flexible governance structure. In talking about the capacity and preparedness of the state, whether or not the state is capacitated enough or prepared enough, institutional capacity, multidisciplinary collaboration, citizen participation, innovation in policy making, capacity building, international cooperation, and then you're also simultaneously giving out the solutions. Institutional capacity, the state's ability to address wicked problems depends on the strength and adaptability of its institutions. So what is the primary institution in terms of policy implementation? Which is bureaucracy. So bureaucratic structures need to be flexible, responsive, adaptive to changing circumstances. Weberian bureaucratic model with the hierarchical structure and strict adherence to rules may not be well suited. So you've also given out the problems, you've also given out the solutions. However, the NPM, new public management approach, which emphasizes decentralization, flexibility, and result orientation, could offer a better framework. Second, collaboration in terms of multidisciplinariness. So wicked problems often cut across various sectors and require collaboration among different disciplines and stakeholders. The state needs to encourage and facilitate such collaborations by creating platforms of dialogue, negotiation. There's a DNA approach, dialogue, negotiation, action. You can directly mention that, knowledge sharing, joint problem solving, etc. For example, addressing the climate change issue requires coordination among environmental scientists, economists, urban planners, and policy makers. Third is citizen participation. Given the complexity and far-reaching implications of wicked problems, the state must involve citizens in the decision-making process, ensuring that the perspectives and concerns are raised. This is nothing what you can extrapolate directly. Citizen participation, innovation. So innovative policy making is also needed. Why? Because of the new problems that are arising. So you need policy labs, pilot projects, etc. to come into play. Capacity building. This is a keyword directly picked up. So capacity building and institution capacity was directly picked up, right? Lastly, international cooperation. Many wicked problems such as climate change and terrorism transcend the national boundaries and therefore require global solutions. The state must be prepared to engage in international cooperation and diplomacy to develop and implement coordinated policies and strategies. Conclusion: despite these potential approaches, the state may continue to struggle with wicked problems due to several factors. These may include political constraints, limited resources, bureaucratic inertia, inherent complexity, etc. Nevertheless, by adopting the principles and practices that we've already mentioned above, the state can enhance its capacity and preparedness to tackle wicked problems in a more effective and inclusive manner. There's nothing but overall policy problems coming down in the present context and telling us how the problems are more challenging and more new and more diverse and need to be addressed in its entirety, right? Everything remains the same. You just have to contextualize it in the manner that the question is demanding. Yes, last question for today. Groups work to elevate the issues on the policy agenda or seek to deny other groups the opportunity to place issues. In this background, discuss the role of interest groups in agenda setting in the developing countries. Nothing but a pressure group question and linked to public policy. So this is more of paper 2, pressure groups, but you have to link it to public policy. Tell us how one group works to elevate their own issues, or it elevates to, or it de-elevates the issues of others. And in this context, you have to discuss the role of interest groups in the agenda setting. Agenda setting is nothing but policy formulation. That is it. This is nothing but a pressure. How is pressure group influencing policy formulation question? That's it. Okay, so public policy formulation is a dynamic exercise in which the role of interest groups has become significant, especially in agenda setting. Interest groups kya hote? Interest groups are associations of individuals, organizations that on the basis of one or more shared concerns attempt to influence public policy in its favor, usually by lobbying the members of the government. Body groups work to elevate issues on the policy agenda. You can bring it into divide in two parts: how they work for their own agendas, or they seek to deny the other groups the opportunity to place agendas. Interest groups influence on policy making is not a corrupt or illegitimate activity per se, but a key element of the decision making process. However, disproportionate and opaque interest groups influence may lead to administrative corruption, undue influence, state capture, etc., favoring particular interest groups at the expense of the public interest. Interest groups may be classified according to their motivation. You basically talk about the theoretical aspects of interest groups: economic, professional, public interest, CSOs, etc. Also give out some examples of how they've been influencing. So Pratham influences government policies. They come out with the ASER reports, annual status of education reports. So this is policy evaluation. They evaluate the outcomes of the education schemes and act as inputs again. So this is policy formulation. So agenda setting. right? The most commonly adopted strategy in this regard is lobbying. They furnish information, especially pertaining to policy-related issues, to politicians, elected members of the parliament or legislatures, and other government officials, and make an attempt to influence their actions and decisions to suit their interests. Lobbying, although not legal in India, but is legal in USA, and corporate lobbying is legal in USA. However, in terms of India, you can give out such examples such as, how the farmers lobby came out with the repealment of the farm laws. Similarly, the IAS lobby in India does not bring about any transformational or overall change in the civil services in India. Similarly, you can talk about the caste-based associations bringing about their own welfare interests and not letting a reservation go. All right, these are some examples we can talk about in the Indian context. Role of interest groups in agenda setting. This is more theoretical, but you have to try to bring out examples as well. So mobilizing public opinion, how? So for example, Anna Hazare example for Lokpal bill. Lobbying and advocacy. So street vendors act in 2014 came into about for the national street vendors. Lobbying and advocacy, mobilizing the public opinion. Policy formulation and implementation, right to education act. Also talk about Pratham NGO's role here. Monitoring and accountability, again, social audit mechanisms, give out various examples of how accountability is being ensured because of the social audit. Coalition building and networking, again, so for example, the People's Budget Initiative in India is a coalition of civil society organizations which influence the government's budgetary process, right? So conclusion, the interest groups put pressure on the government through multiple ways to elicit beneficial response, which also benefits the government, as associations can help to fill the knowledge gap and set agenda for the policy. However, it is necessary that all groups who do not have the similar weight should also be given space by the government. You have also talked about how we need equity in pressure groups themselves. So why are we mentioning this? Because the tone of the question was such. So it said that वो अपना agenda तो करते हैं और दूसरों को नीचे करते हैं. But we are saying that जो दूसरों को नीचे करते हैं, दूसरों को भी ऊपर लाना है, right? Along with their own agenda setting. And we can never show pressure groups in negative light, but you can talk about the problems within the pressure groups. So for example, if they have their own self interests, they try to put others down, etc. And you give out the solutions as well. But overall, you have to keep the tone positivist for pressure groups. With this, we come to an end of this unit as well. Today was a very, very important session with a lot of questions being asked in the previous years. If you have any doubts, you can let me know. Otherwise, I think we are done with the session for today. Any doubts? If you guys are also writing down answers, you can let me know. We can schedule some evaluation sessions as well. Yes, anything? Otherwise, we'll end the session. All right. I see no doubts. Then we'll end it. Thank you for joining in. Have a good day.
Thank you, sir.